In this next video, we're going to talk about line weights, what they are, and how to use them. Like line types, line weights are another communication tool used in technical drawing. Their purpose is to add readability and depth of view to your drawings. When we talk about line weight, we are talking about the width or the thickness of the line. We're not talking about its tonal value, which is its grayness, how gray it is, if it's light gray, medium gray, dark gray. We're talking about all completely black lines and varying the width or thickness of the line. Here's an example on your screen of a hand sketch done with line weights. You can see how it immediately calls attention to the important areas of the drawing, the darkness of the profile line and the edge of that building. Your drawing should have a range of line weights, again, to add that communications capability and ease of reading the drawing. The article that I had you read down here, Architectural Graphics 101 Line Weights, indicates a range of line weights to be profile, heavy, medium, light, and hatch. Right, so here's an example of it. Profile is the edges, very heavy edges of items. Perhaps it's where something's been cut through. It's a very thick line. Your heavy line is going to be your important details. Maybe it's the edge of a wall. In this case, actually this example doesn't have a heavy line. The next lighter line would be a medium line weight, and this this designer, is using it for the edge of this door. And so these are items that are still important in your drawing, but perhaps they're farther back, or perhaps they are of less importance than the items in your heavy line weight. Step it down one more time and you've got the light line weight. These are for minor details. For example, this baseboard line right here and the trim around the door are using a light line weight. And finally, hatch, or also called poche, which is when you fill something in, poche, is going to use your lightest line weight. Here's another source to learn about line weight. In this case, this particular author kind of categorizes line weights as heavy, medium, light, and very light. Okay. Heavy lines are used to delineate or show the profiles of plan and section cuts. So anywhere where you cut through things, for example, in a plan, you're actually cutting through the walls, remember, and looking down. And so you would use heavy lines. Medium line weights are used to show the edges of items, perhaps the intersection or change of direction of something. Light line weights are for your details. Perhaps it's a change in material. And again, we're stepping down with the sizes. And finally, the very light lines are for, again, your very small details, your hatch patterns, your surface textures, and if you need to lay out or organize your drawing. Let's take a look at this plot plan, this example drawing again, and focusing on the line weights. What's the heaviest line weight in this drawing? It's the outline of this building right here. And you can tell that your eye is immediately drawn to that. It's the most important thing in this drawing. Um, other kind of, if you step down from that profile line weight to maybe a heavy line weight, we can see contour line, we can see this bush, and we can see the driveway and sidewalk lines. A lighter line weight, so perhaps a medium line weight, is these dimension lines and leader lines. Here's an example of the same detail being drawn at two different times in the design process. On the left, you have a design drawing. On the right, you have a construction drawing. Okay, there's two different goals for communication for these different drawings, but you can see that they both use line weight to convey information. On the left-hand side with the design drawing, you have a strong, thick profile line conveying where the wall has been cut. And you've got much thinner lines for these surface textures of the wall behind. In the construction drawing, you still have thick profiles. They're much more detailed profiles because we're now showing more detail about how the wall is built. And then you've got a thinner hatch pattern for those cut materials. And then a very light line for some items that are beyond the cut line. We're using a kind of a medium line here for dimension lines. When you do hand drafting, you can immediately see your line weights. I mean, that's obvious. When you draw the line, you can see if it's a thin, medium, or heavy line. With computer drafting, it's a little more complicated. Even if you deliberately show the line weights on your monitor view, it may or may not show up that exact way when you plot it. So it's suggested that you always run a test print to check your line weights. But the good news is, along with everything else, changes to line weight are much easier to make in digital drawing than a hand drawing. So that's one of the huge advantages of computer drafting is always changes are far easier to make. This week in the Hotel Tutorial 2, you're going to be asked to assign different items in your drawing to different layers, and then assign line weights to those layers. So let's take a look at what those might be. The layers are 0, fixtures, format, furniture, miscellaneous, structure, and viewport. And here are the different line weights that your textbook asks you to assign to them. Remember that when we talked about line weights, the different range of line weights, we called them profile, heavy, medium, light, and hatch. So which do you think applies to each of the layers that your textbook has asked you to create? Well, this structure layer that your textbook asks you to put your walls, doors, and windows on a structure layer, I think would correspond to a heavy line weight. Your bathroom fixtures, your furniture blocks, and the smaller blocks such as, I don't know, the telephone, are on a medium line weight. The default line, by the way, when you don't assign any line weight in AutoCAD, there's a default, and it's a very thin or light line weight. Your textbook asks you to put the title block border on a layer they call formats, and it's got a much thicker line weight than the other lines. I would call that a profile line weight. And finally, your viewport is put on, your viewport border is put on a layer named viewport, and they didn't ask you to assign a line weight to that, so it's at the default. But the whole point of putting your viewport on a separate layer is that you can turn it off, and so it won't print. And I call those layers that you intend to turn off non-plot layers. Okay, I hope this helped you understand the concept of line weights. In the next video, I'll show you how to apply them in AutoCAD. Thanks, everyone.